Welcome back to Joe Stunner Boxing. I hope you're doing well. Let's talk about Agit Kabayel because, as I'm sure you know, he had that fantastic victory over Arslanbek Makhmudov on the day of reckoning card, and he looked like $1 million. It was like a coming out party, you know. And Kabayel had, what can you say about him? I mean, the last 5 or 6 years, he's definitely been hiding his light under a bushel because this guy he looked like a top 5 fighter, top 10 fighter certainly. But over the last however many years, 5 or 6 years, although he's been the 2-time EBU champ, which is, a good achievement, he hasn't been fighting any world-class fighters. And when he got the opportunity to fight one who was very highly ranked, he totally dominated him and knocked him out. So where does he stand at the moment? Well, I wanted to talk about who, if you had a magic wand, you could give it a little wave. Who would you put him in with, regardless of the politics, regardless of what's going on? The little, proposed fights and signed fights and fights that are supposedly going to happen and don't. Regardless of all that political nonsense, who would you have Agit Kabayel fight next? Well, I think there are several possibilities, but before we get into it, I think the best way to do this is to go down the rankings because Kabayel was lowly ranked in the top 15 by a couple of organisations, whereas Makhmudov was ranked very highly by the organisations. In the WBC, Makhmudov was ranked at 3 and Kabayel was ranked at 13. With the WBA, Makhmudov was 4 and Kabayel wasn't ranked in the top 15. With the IBF, Makhmudov was 7 and Kabayel was 12. And with the WBO, Makhmudov was 14, which is remarkably low, and Kabayel, oddly enough, was 13. So the WBO they kind of got it right in one sense, for once. But who would you like to see Kabayel fight? Well, let's go through a few names now, okay? You would assume, when the new rankings come out, by the way, that Makhmudov will have fallen and Kabayel will be above him. But of course, sometimes we use logic with the ruling bodies when logic is something that they seem to not be fans of. So let's have a chat. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ignore the fighters who lost on the day of reckoning card, okay? Because they are possibilities as opponents for Kabayel, but I want to concentrate on the other top tenors because I want Kabayel to progress, to move even further up the rankings. So if you look at, first of all, there are a couple I don't think he will fight, and one is Zhilei Zhang, because Zhang is the WBO interim champ and he's gonna want a title shot sooner rather than later, especially as he's 40 years of age. Now he might have to keep busy because the belts are tied up. So it's not impossible that him and Kabayel could fight. Zhang might regard it as high risk, low reward, although Zhang is the type of guy who will fight anyone. Let's not forget he did lose to Filip Hrgović. You can argue that Hrgović won that fight. But his 2 victories over Parker have put him at the top of the contender tree with the WBO. If he was to fight Kabayel, I mean, he potentially, even if he gave up that WBO interim title, if he beats people like Kabayel and consolidates his status and his position, he could be very highly ranked in more than one body. Because the thing about Zhang is he's ranked with the WBO, and therefore that excludes him from being ranked by the other ruling bodies. So I think Zhang is sort of between a rock and a hard place, holding that belt. But I can't really see him fighting Kabayel. Maybe I'm wrong. I'd like to fight. I would be intrigued by, certainly, definitely. But would he fight him? Will he fight him? I don't know. I have doubts. But definitely an intriguing matchup. The other one who I don't think will fight him. I definitely don't think this guy will fight Kabayel anytime soon, and that's Filip Hrgović, because Hrgović is the number 1 contender for the IBF. There is talk of the IBF belt perhaps going vacant because Fury and Usyk, once they fight, or if they fight, if they go through with that, they probably won't want to honour the IBF mandatory, so that they'll make the belt will go free. And yeah, Hrgović is the number 1 ranked contender. Will probably fight Joshua. So I don't see Hrgović fighting Agit Kabayel anytime soon at all. It's high risk, low reward. What about Frank Sanchez? Now, Frank Sanchez he's clearly got talent. He's got an awful lot of tools in his, as I always call it, a fistic toolbox up here, and your ability to fire beautiful combinations, which he has. Very, very speedy fighter. Sanchez clearly has a lot of talent, and of course had a great amateur career. But there is something about him that makes me think, I just have a slight doubt about him. I can see the talent, I can see the ability, but I'm not quite sure about certain other things, about how he puts it all together. There's something missing, and I can't quite put my finger on it. I think if you can imagine, you've got all these dots that make a picture, and he doesn't quite always join the dots in the correct way to make the proper picture during a fight. You know what I mean? Am I getting a bit too airy-fairy here? But a good fighter, don't get me wrong. I mean, Sanchez deserves to be a top 10 heavyweight, no question about it. I just think he might be found out sooner or later. And Kabayel could very well be the man to do that, to expose yet another killer. Now, I have to say, I would make Sanchez the slight favourite in that fight, because I think his hand speed, his combination punching, and once he gets his engine running in a fight, he's a threat. But I can certainly see him having to come from behind to win. Mind you, I said that about Makhmudov. I picked Makhmudov to beat Agit Kabayel, so we see what happened there. So I don't know. I would make Sanchez a favourite over Kabayel, but you just never know. But it'll be a good fight. It'll be a very, very intriguing fight. What about Efe Ajagba? Because Ajagba's ranked 5 by the WBC. He's also in the top 10 with the IBF. I think he's number 8 or 9. And I'm not sure about the WBO. I think he might be in the top, sort of lower top 10 or top 15, certainly. But conspicuous by his absence with the WBA. That's a strange one. That Efe Ajagba, I thought, would be in their top 15 at least, but apparently he isn't. Don't forget, these rankings came before the day of reckoning, so they will be adjusted accordingly with people falling and people rising, one would assume. But Efe Ajagba for Agit Kabayel, I think, is a very, very interesting fight. And Ajagba has improved since losing to Frank Sanchez, definitely. He's not quite so robotic. His punches flow a bit better. He seems to have... he almost seems to have a higher ring IQ, because the way he uses the punches, where he puts them together and knowing which punches to fire at what particular time, I think that seems to have improved. So I think Kabayel against Efe Ajagba is a good fight, an interesting fight. Will it happen? Could it happen? Well, I wouldn't rule it out, but I don't know. I think I get the impression that Efe Ajagba's handlers have got a very specific plan. Probably want to go down the WBC route. And I don't know whether Kabayel, again, high risk, low reward, would be on their radar. I doubt it very much. Likewise with Jared Anderson, I don't think they... again, an interesting fight. All these are interesting fights if you put them in with Kabayel. But I don't think Jared Anderson would get matched with Kabayel. And again, I repeat, I'm sounding like a broken record. High risk, low reward. Anderson is ranked highly by the WBO. He's number 2. But yeah, I don't know. No, I don't see him taking a risk and fighting Kabayel. Even though I'd probably make him the favourite. I mean, he's also, I think he's number 5 with the IBF as well. So he's got a couple of options, WBO and IBF. And he's number 6 with the WBC, although, all of these ruling bodies, you're going to have to wait and see what happens with the belts? Are we going to get an undisputed champ? And if so, are they going to hold on to the belts? The IBF will probably go. But, you know, let's say Usyk was to beat Fury, he might retire, in which case all 4 belts go up in the air. So I think in the case of every heavyweight, not just Kabayel, it's a matter of sort of manoeuvring yourself into positions 1 or 2, so that if a belt does become vacant and you're ranked 1 or 2, you get to fight for the vacant belt. I think if I was a heavyweight, I would be looking at that option, definitely, you know, that kind of strategy. And I get the feeling with people like Jared Anderson, you know, and Anna Jagba, they've got that in mind. They're kind of manoeuvring them as high as possible in the rankings. And despite beating Makhmudov, I don't see Kabayel suddenly being propelled into the top 5, although, like I said earlier, Makhmudov was number 3 with the WBC and number 4 with the WBA. So where do we go from here? I mean, yeah. What about Daniel Dubois and Kabayel? Now, I think this would be an excellent fight for both fighters, because they're both in the ascendancy. Dubois had that fantastic win over Jarrell Miller. Really terrific, really fantastic win, and more or less, you know, redeemed himself to a large extent anyway with that win. He showed a lot of guts, a lot of fortitude. He showed that there is some dog in him after capitulating against Alexander Usyk. I think that will be an interesting matchup. Can it happen? I wouldn't rule it out. I do, yeah. I wouldn't rule it out at all. I think again, European. I mean, if Kabayel still has the EBU title, I think that would be a very good fight for Daniel, because he could pick up the EBU title. I don't think that's a bad fight at all, to be honest. And I would definitely be intrigued by it. I definitely would. But again, I mean, Daniel, he's going to move up. Kabayel's going to move up. Would they take the risk? I think they probably would, both of them. I think they probably would, yeah. I'm thinking about this as I go along. But yeah. Of course, I should mention that Kabayel has called out Anthony Joshua. I don't think that's going to happen. I think Joshua will go down the vacant IBF belt route with Hrgovic if that happens, if that belt becomes vacant, which it probably will. So yeah, what about Joe Joyce? And if Joe Joyce is on the comeback against Kabayel, much bigger man than Kabayel, Joyce, very predictable style, has had his mystique taken away, just like Makhmudov did by Zhilei Zhang. In the case of Joe Joyce, it's by Zhilei Zhang. Yeah, I'd watch that fight. Yeah. Who have I missed out? Well, there's Martin Bakole is someone that I definitely, that would really intrigue me. Bakole and Kabayel. Bakole, I'd like to see that fight a lot. I'd like to see that fight. I think Bakole deserves a chance to stamp his name on the top 10. He is actually ranked, but I mean, he's 11 with the IBF. I can't remember, 7 I think with the WBC. But again, it's all about these belts going up in the air, and I get the feeling that these fighters, even though they're going to have to fight each other in the top 10 at some point, I just think that they're going to try and manage themselves into a position, navigate themselves into a position where if the belts, like I said earlier, go up in the air, they're ready to pounce. But yeah, look, I'm kind of just chewing the fat here and rambling on a bit, but I'm curious to know what you think about Kabayel. Who would you put him in with next, regardless of the politics? Or perhaps it's a better way to look at it is to say, well, what do you think is the best route for Agit Kabayel to get into a position where he can fight for one of those vacant belts, or if most of the belts don't go up in the air, to get to an Usyk or a Fury? And things are kind of in no man's land a little bit. They're in limbo a little bit because of the situation with Fury and Usyk, who are about to fight. I did a video saying do have doubts that fight will go ahead, at least in February, in which case the other contenders will have to fight, will continue fighting. They can't just sort of go stagnant. Unless you're the PBC, and then it's a given that as a fighter you're probably going to go stagnant because they fight so little. But what do you think about Kabayel? How good do you think he is? Who do you think he can beat, and who do you think he can't beat? I'm interested to hear that. Leave your comments below, and of course I'll read them. I'll answer as many as I can. Thank you for your time as always. Please subscribe to the channel if you're new. That helps us out a lot. And also hit the like button. And I will catch you later. Looking forward to reading what you've got to say. And bye for now.